So we are starting the Eden Open Education Week, which is part of our contribution to the global event organized by the Open Education Global Open Education Week, which is running for 11th time in the row. And I'm very happy that Eden has joined with the 7th Eden Open Education Week. So quite confusing. We have within the Eden prepared 5 sessions, starting one today, and every day this week we have one session. So I'm inviting you all to follow our sessions and join in the next one. And also, just before I start my presentation, my session, just to remind you that Eden is organizing Eden Annual Conference this year in Dublin, and I hope you will join us there as well. So now going back to business. Title of today's session is What is the Future of Open Education? I would say a little bit philosophical title. We could discuss a lot about this. But actually, I have been talking to people, and there are quite different attitudes, views, insights on what's going on with open education. So I have invited, I would say, top policymakers, experts, and practitioners in the field of open, online, and distance education to talk with me today about the future of open education, and I hope all of you here as participants will join me as well and my guests in this discussion. To announce who are my panelists, with pleasure, I would just briefly say a few words about each of them. So first of all, Professor Joseph Duart from Open University Catalonia and President of Eden Distance Learning Europe. Joseph is research professor in Educational Sciences Technology Department, but also Vice President for Postgraduate Studies and Lifelong Learning and former Director of International Graduate Institute at Open University of Catalonia. He was founder and director of the UNESCO Chair in e-learning. He is editor-in-chief of International Journal of Education Technology in Higher Education, which is published by Springer. So I'm very happy that he's today with us. He's also my boss, so I have to be good with him in Eden because he's looking or watching over what I'm doing. Just joking. The next one, my dear colleague and friend, Professor Mark Brown from Dublin City University. Mark is the first chair of digital learning and the director of National Institute for Digital Learning at Dublin City University. And also he is past vice president of Open and Distance Learning Association Australia. He is a senior fellow of Eden member of a management board, treasurer, and also changing the functions in Eden quite oftenly. So I'm not sure how to call him at the moment. But maybe just to mention one thing more, he is a member of DCU2 team contributing to Encore Plus project, which aims to build a European network for catalyzing OER for education and business. And also he has a contract to develop national statutory quality assurance guidelines for blended and online learning, and to core this is enabling more institutions to embed open educational resources in learning and curriculum design. So Mark, thank you for being here today with us.
Hello, everyone.
Next is Professor Pina McCoy, who already was once at Eden webinar, so she's not new in Eden. I'm very happy to have her with us today. She is a research professor and the Dean of the College of Education at the University of South Africa and the Commonwealth of Learning Chair in Open Education Resources and Practices. And she has worked on numerous commissioned research project for Commonwealth of Learning, UNESCO, British Council, Council for Higher Education, and so on. So Mapina, welcome, and I'm glad that you are with us today. And we have a newcomer today, if I'm seeing quite well. Yes, newcomer. This is James Glapa Grosklak from USA, and I'm very happy to have him on the board in Eden. So we managed to get you into Eden as well. James is Dean Education, Technology, Learning Resources, and Distance Learning at College of Canyons in California. And he's recognized global leader in open education. And he is a global ambassador for OER, for the International Councils for Open and Distance Education. He has been with Open Education Global with many years in the different roles as a past president, vice president, treasurer of the board. And so he is quite familiar with everything global is working, but also on a global level aware of the issues and things which are happening within open education. James is currently OER Fellow for Michelson 20mm Foundation. But more importantly, in 2018, he was recognized by Open Education Global as a top 10 global influencer in OER for the past decade. And in 2019, he received the President Award from Open Education Global for advancing open education around the world through his exceptional dedication, outstanding contribution, and exemplary service. I could go on, but I think that the participants got enough that you are really right person for this session. So welcome, James, today with us. Next is Andrea Innamorato, my dear friend. We know each other for quite long, and I'm very happy that she got the position of Executive Director of Open Education Global. She's just the right person for this position. She is senior researcher in the field of open education, educational technology, and digital competencies with over 16 years of experience. She keeps her scientific contribution through the University of Barcelona Faculty of Education. Previously, she worked at the European Commission Joint Research Center as a senior researcher. She just recently left this position to become executive director at Open Education Global. And she was there working on interface of research and policy in digital education. And she holds the PhD in educational technology from the Open University of UK. So Andrea, thank you for joining us today. And last but not least, I hope I did see that we have Michael with us. Just let me see. Is Michael with us today? I didn't see him. Here we planned to have Michael Gable from European University Association. I hope he will join, but at the moment I do not see him here. And we have so many participants, I just cannot go into looking it. But I hope Michael will join us, and he's a director of higher education policy unit there, working really quite a lot on issues related to higher education and learning and teaching. So I hope he will share the thoughts and plans of European University Association. So I'm just stopped to share my screen, just going back to normal. So we thought that today's session will be a panel, but I asked my speakers to give me statements in that way that I'm sorry, I do not see much here, that we can talk about. Okay, and let me see if I got out. Yes. So you could see in the announcement the statements as well, but I've thought first, before we start with this statement, I would like to ask Andrea to just give a brief overview of the Open Education Week run by Open Education Global, just to give us a glimpse how it's going this year. So Andrea, please.
Thank you very much, Sandra. So Good afternoon, good morning to everyone joining us today. I can see that we have 175 people with us so far. I'd like to greet also my fellow panel members who are colleagues and friends, long dated. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Eden and DLE, for participating once more at the Open Education Week. As you say, Sandra, for the 7th year in a row with a fantastic program of 5 different sessions. So I can only thank you a lot for your activity and participation in Open Education Week. I'm very pleased to say that we have had more than 340 submissions to Open Education Week from all over the world this year. So we have a full week packed with wonderful activities, events that are both live and face to face as well, and assets submitted to the Open Education Week. We also have collaborations and connections going on in our platform called OEG Connect. I hope you can join. And I would just like to take a couple of minutes to make announcements, 2 announcements in particular. Now from the beginning. First of all, I'd like to invite everyone to come to our conference this year, which is going to be from the 16th to the 18th of October in Canada, in Edmonton, co-hosted by Northwest College. The theme of our conference this year is building a sustainable world through open education, which is a very relevant topic, one must say. So submissions are now open, and it would be very nice to see you there. And the second and very important announcement as well is that we have a special promotion, a special discount for membership during the Open Education Week this year. We are launching a new category of membership, which is called individual members. So in case you yourself as an individual would like to become a member of Open Education Global, this is the time to do so, because it's a free introductory membership for individuals during the Open Education Week. You can find the link in our page, Open Education Global. We also have a special discount for institutions, 20% discount in membership for North American and European institutions, as well as 50% discount for institutions from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, because they are underrepresented in our members' database. So we'd like to have more people joining from those parts of the world. And also, we also welcome corporate members that are aligned with our mission. So thank you very much, and wishing everyone a fantastic Open Education Week. Sandra.
Thank you, Andrea. Well, I hope everyone will enjoy today's session. Please, as I see, you have already sent regards in the chat, and looking forward to the questions as well and comments there. And now let's start with this part. I see that Mihail has joined us, and it's working fine for him as well. So let's start. As I said, I planned to have some statements from my speakers to give some their view and thinking about open education. So maybe, Joseph, I could start with you. With your open education statement. If you do you have it, or do you know it, or do you want me to read it to you? But yes, you said open education is a way of understanding.
I have it, don't worry about that.
Yeah, so please, can you elaborate a little bit about it?
Okay, thank you very much, Sandra. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. I see people from different countries in the world, and thank you very much for joining us today in this first webinar of the Eden Open Education Week. Yes, my statement is, I'm talking as a practitioner, because I'm not a specialist in this area of open education, but I can say that from the beginning, I have the possibility to work in an open space. I started as a professor in my university, in Open University of Catalonia, just at the beginning of this university. That means 26 years ago. And I cannot understand the education without being open. I think the openness of education is the way to understand education, not? And I tried to do that, of course, during these 26 years in our university. At the beginning, it was a little bit more complicated, but later, as soon as the technology allow us the possibility to create contents and put them in the open space and to use and to reuse. And that for us was something that very interesting because allow us to understand better the way that we can improve our educational model, more based in learning activities oriented to the students in order to facilitate the learning materials using, of course, open educational resources. It's the same in the case of the Eden. Eden is an open network. We are working in a network, practitioners, professionals, researchers, sharing our content, putting these contents in open in order to be the possibility to use it and also to share and to build together ideas. And another area of my activity is I'm editor-in-chief as one journal, which is the first journal in the rankings or in the indexes, the first one which is open. And it's under a big publisher company, which is Springer, but according with the agreement that we have with Springer, we force this institution to maintain the journal as an open journal and also free without APCs in order to allow to the researchers to have the opportunity to put these contents there in open and share these contents and build together with this content. This is the idea. As I said at the beginning, I'm not a specialist in this area, but of course I'm trying to work as an educator, as a professor, using the full potential that the open education have. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Joseph. You mentioned very good things as a practitioner from your point of view, and also from the perspective of having the journal in open education. And always thinking about how to interpret the context, to be open and to use. And maybe to move, Mark, to you, because you said open education is a popular catechism which suffer from many different interpretations. So quite challenging sentence. So can you a little bit elaborate on it?
Yes, I wrote this statement when I was feeling just a little bit, I guess, reflective about open education. What I wrote was that open education is a popular catechism. What I mean by that is it's one of these words, I sometimes describe words like this, like aerosol that you spray, and sometimes it smells quite good if it's underarm deodorant. Sometimes it's not so good when you spray it because it's fly spray, but usually it doesn't last very long. And you try to touch it and you can't really feel it, really. It disappears. So what is this thing? It suffers from many different interpretations. Ultimately, it's actually 10 years ago this year that I was first involved with a very good colleague, Karina Bosnu, in Australia, when I was then located in New Zealand. And we developed a OER feasibility protocol for Australian higher education. And I'm not sure much has changed. For me, a much more transformative, a deeper conception of openness really has to challenge some pretty fundamental practices that continue today that are largely still closed. They're wrapped around closed beliefs, closed policies, and quite closed cultures. Yes, it's great in a week like this to celebrate our successes, and I'm all for accentuated the positive. In fact, you need optimism. If you don't, we shouldn't be even talking about this. But I'm also realistic. To pick up on Joseph's comment around the wealth of open access literature, particularly around this area and new technologies in education, my own team annually publishes what we call our top 10 open access good reads for the year, drawn from dozens and dozens of open access journals. But we also, in that exercise, say, what else should people be reading that's not open? And sadly, there's still a lot published in these closed proprietary journals. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is because it links to the reward system that many of us work under. There's a so-called status, a league table of these journals. And in order to get promoted, to be pragmatic, in many universities in particular, people need to be publishing in these closed journals. It's not a game I've personally wanted to play. I kind of know how you can play it, but ultimately I want people to read my work. And openness for me is a deeply personal thing, as well as having that professional dimension. Personally, openness for me is the best way of benchmarking yourself, of improving, of not being afraid to make mistakes and share those and learn from others. Of course, you want to take that into a cultural dimension of openness, but sadly, even the institution I work within, to quote from Martin Weller's well-known book about the battle for openness, this is a constant battle. I'm always up against closed doors, trying to open those doors. Of course, that's how change happens, though. One person at a time, one door opened at a time. And I guess that's why we're all committed to openness.
Perfect. You have elaborated really well, but that gives me actually intro to the James statement, because he said open education is not an end goal itself. So just to continue, James, please, can you share with us your thoughts?
Sure. Thank you, Sandra. Well, many of you, well, let me first say I'm speaking from the perspective of the United States. I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody who works primarily in teaching settings, teaching institutions, rather than the research-heavy institutions that Mark's alluding to. Many of you who have been involved in or aware of open education for many years understand probably that open education has been viewed as a movement, as a passion, as a cause, something that idealistically is going to change the world, somehow magically going to change the world by everybody being open. And within the United States in the past few years, we've seen what I think is a very healthy, practical change away from this sense of idealism of a movement towards a practical recognition that open education is a tool that has to serve or can serve larger causes. The larger causes that open education is serving within the United States today are, first of all, college or university completion, the ability to harness open education to increase the throughput of students to completing certificates and degrees and diplomas. One of the biggest ways in which this is happening is through the creation of entire degree pathways built around open educational resources. We refer to them as zero textbook cost degrees, or Z degrees, or Z-cred, our colleagues in Canada would say, so that students from start to finish in their educational experience never have to utilize commercial material. So that's one way in which open education is serving as a tool to a larger goal. The second way in which open education is serving as a tool for a larger goal in the United States certainly is to increase the sense of belonging of students so that they're able to better see themselves in the learning materials. For way too long, probably through the history of established education in the United States, certainly, and if not in the West, educational materials have reflected the faces and the values of the dominant society and the dominant structure. And that's led to all kinds of issues of people feeling left out and being excluded and not finding their voices, let alone their images reflected in the learning materials. So utilizing open education is increasingly becoming a way to change instructional materials and even to co-create instructional materials with students so that they're better able to see themselves reflected in the learning materials. That increases a sense of belonging in the classroom, reducing the social distance that minoritized populations often feel regarding established institutions of higher education and established societal values. Using open education to change the instructional materials and co-create with students is a way of bringing more people into higher education, and then again, increasing the throughput and the completion for those students. So open education is reducing its sense of a grand movement in the United States, at least, and becoming more of a practical tool for larger purposes.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. Still, we will talk a little bit later why we still have to rediscover all this over and over. So let's move now to the another continent, from America to South Africa. Mpina, what would you give as your statement?
My belief is that open education needs to address the social justice mandate of equitability, inclusivity, and ensuring that every person has the opportunity to learn. Because we live in a society where higher education has been exclusionary in nature. And as a result, it has led to a large number of people being excluded from higher education simply because they don't have resources to. So in under-resourced communities like ours, it's real, it's a reality. And my strongest belief is that it has to address the social justice mandate. We need to look at it going back to the basics of what education is supposed to be and what education is meant to be. And now with the digitalization environment that we find ourselves in fact, that COVID forced us to be in higher education, we find that the education system has to be more and more open. There's no two way about it. It has to move forward. It has to be open to enable that accessibility that we are looking for, to enable that flexibility that we are looking for. Now people can get into networked communities from across the globe to learn amongst each other about certain things. So as we move into this area, we find that, yes, higher education will always be there. Universities will always be there. But we need to see how higher education will cope with things like ChatGPT that is coming in. And they're coming in at a speed that is unbelievable. So my thinking is that open education has been viewed the way it has been viewed for many, many years of what is meant to achieve. And those are very good things to achieve. As a practitioner, I thought, well, if in my view it's going to open up access, it will enable students not to buy textbooks, and they can have access to textbooks. We don't have to sit and develop study material coming from a distance education, because that's what we do. We develop study material, we can look for study material and all that. I found that many people are still resistant to that. And part of the resistance is that open education is up against centuries and centuries, yes, centuries and centuries of a closed education system. Now, to get that open, it's going to be equal and uphill. And although even COVID assisted us a little bit to get to that space, but it really is going to be an uphill, because we don't know of education system that is not open. And in our communities, we work with regulatory bodies. The government of South Africa, for an example, we have so many policies. I think we have 3 that deal specifically with open education, open learning, and even how it could be implemented, including frameworks to implement it. And yet, we still find it very difficult to move into that. And I think part of the reason is what Mark referred to about the reward system. So for us to move into open education space, we need to start dealing with the assumptions that have been there about higher education, that it has to be elitist. We need to deal with the structures, dismantle the structures that have been there, the systems that have been there before. And we have to do them one by one, because if we don't do that, we'll find ourselves completely underprepared for the future that we aspire for. And even now, communities don't take us seriously anymore, because we produce people who are not very beneficial for the society that we produce them for the communities that we produce them for. So I found that it's a very difficult. It's not, you know, it's not like it's not doable. It can be doable if we get the critical mass behind us, your students, to understand that if we say education that is produced by the taxpayers' money has to be made accessible to all and sundry, because we pay taxes to the education system. So the education system needs all the material that is produced has to be made accessible. The problem here is that if the policies are not pushing that agenda and the policies are acting contrary to that belief, it makes it very difficult at our practical level, at our practice level, to do that. Even if policies are saying it and they do not invest in what they are talking about, we will continue asking ourselves whether we are still going ahead with openness or not. And the regulatory bodies, again, we need to question them. We need to come up with ways. But I think if we remove money from the equation and get higher education back to education, because now it is very much a business model that is running our universities. And I was surprised. I thought it was on our context, but it's everywhere. That is running our country, and that's what we find ourselves in. So maybe I have to keep quiet. I'll go for a long time. I'm a teacher. That's what I do for a living.
Yeah, thank you, Wilfrina. You have a very good point, but we will come back to these issues a little bit later. Let's move on with statements. So we were talking about higher education, Michael, and maybe as the European University Association, what can you say from that point? How do you find open education? What would be your statement?
Well, I think we have a bit of a dilemma here, and it has also already been said by colleagues. There is the promise of better quality at lower costs for all, but so that should be a home run. That how can you be against it? But the reality is when you look at the institutions, it's not there. It's difficult to get that into the mainstream. It's difficult to get that into institutional strategies. And I think this is what I'm interested in. I mean, I have a positive look at it and would also agree with what Joseph said. We seem to make some progress. If I look around, we have MOOCs, we have short courses, we have much more open learning resources than we used to have. So that looks good. If you look at our open publishing statistics, they are rising. Yeah, so there's more open publishing. The European Commission promotes it. So there are things changing, and that's good. But when you look at the institutions, you find out, okay, there are always some academics, and they're probably now listening to us, who are enthusiastic about it and embrace it and really like it. But for many others, they are not so convinced and might not use it. When we look at institutional repositories for learning resources, almost every institution has one, but we know very little of how good they are, and are they really used, and are they really useful? So that's a bit my question here. Why is there not an OER culture then? Maybe it has to do with the fact that the cost-saving aspect is not yet convincing enough. We are talking about textbooks for free, but maybe the institutions don't need textbooks there. Course materials are still prepared by individual teachers, increasingly by teams of teachers. They do their own. It might not automatically translate or easily translate in different languages. So there is a professional culture which may have to change. That might be one argument. It has certainly also to do with academic careers. Mark pointed to it. Teaching is not yet fully recognized as an academic activity. It's you make your career still in research. So then the whole preparation of teaching, development of teaching materials, and is probably also something that is underrated and not fully valued as a contribution to the institution. We can see that this is gradually changing. I think we see that changing, teaching gets more and more collaborative, and also the whole online digital environment brings up the questions on where you get teaching materials from, how you prepare them and how you share them. But it's a gradual process, and I think we are all looking for ways of cutting the for shortcuts and moving forward quicker. So we thought actually that the COVID pandemic might change something, or may have changed something. And you could feel that in particular, I think in the first year of the pandemic, where colleagues were looking for resources that they could use and for advice. So there was a very collegial climate everywhere, and everybody was meeting and sharing, I mean, virtually meeting, of course, and sharing and collaborating. And also what James had said about the changing roles of students in higher education institution. I heard much more institutions speaking about co-creation and the important role of students in the institutions. But then again, going out of the crisis, I'm not sure if we really come to a point then where people are convinced that OER is the way forward. We asked colleagues, knowledgeable colleagues, we wanted to do a project about OER and having something like a joint learning project on OER. And we were advised not to do it, but rather do it on collaborative teaching. Because people said OER, is that not very ideological? This is more about a movement, but not about really changing things. So I agree also with what I think James had said, it becomes more practical. So we have more open education. And I think we should, as Mepine said, it's not something that happens automatically. There's a political issue there. This is about business models, organizational models that we have to design and develop to ensure that this is and remains open. So I think that would be my point here. So to summarize, we made some progress on some formats, but it's not yet a sea change. We have to think of how can we ensure that this becomes really strategic for institutions and also for systems, and what are then the economic and organizational models for that.
Thank you, Michael. Very good points. Certainly, we'll come back to some of them. And Andrea, I left you for the end because you were working with the GRC Center, produced a number of documents related to OER and open education, and also we have UNESCO also have the policies on open education. So you said here in your statement that there's a need to update the discourse on open education. That was something to me to want to hear a little bit more. What did you mean by that?
Thank you, Sandra. Yes, well, first of all, I agree with absolutely everything said so far, and it's beautiful to see these different perspectives also outside Europe, from the US and from Mpini from South Africa. I'm going to ask permission to read my short statement, and then I'll comment upon it a little bit, because it was very nice when you asked everyone to provide with a statement, because it made us think about what's the future of open education. So I've written, OE practices, open education practices, need to be connected to social challenges to remain relevant and in the spotlight for policymakers. There is a need to update the discourse on open education, as well as unpack the various ramifications and principles of open education in fields such as artificial intelligence, digital competence, inclusion, equity, and social justice. So to a certain extent, what I'm trying to say here is I agree with everyone. I think that open education, we've been doing open education for many years. Sometimes I also have mixed feelings because I think, oh, we've made a lot of progress, but then I see occasions in which we have to start building on awareness raising from the beginning. Again, starting explaining open education, OER concepts, convincing faculty members or managements of universities. And it's a cycle that we sometimes feel that we never can get out of, no? But I am very positive, because when I started thinking about it, I thought, well, so how is open education appearing nowadays in our discourse? And this is why I said in my statement, I think we should be updating our discourse, because I hardly ever nowadays see or hear the word open education or open education practices in our projects or policy documents, right? And I think that we should not leave it out. We should always be insisting on them, bringing open education back to the main scenario, back to the political agenda, because we do need it to be in the political agenda. However, even though the wording, the terminology does not always appear to being there in those documents, although it is sometimes, and I'll tell you in a minute, I can see the practices coming out, no, from all this work that we've been doing along the years. So, for example, we know that in European projects nowadays, all the results, no, from Erasmus Plus, Horizon projects, need to be released as open licensed resources. So that's a huge thing. It's not a small thing. So we have made that choice. The European Commission itself publishes its documents nowadays under a Creative Commons license. So it's publicly available, but also available for translation, for remixing, so on and so forth. So sometimes open education practices come embedded in other practices that we don't name as such, but which are open education practices, no? So something else I was thinking about was the European Strategy for Universities launched now, and it's a communication from the European Commission launched in 2022, in which the Commission calls upon the third mission of the universities. No? So we know the triangle universities are meant to act on teaching, research, but also disseminating that knowledge to the community, pushing it back and bring it inwards again. And calling upon the third mission of universities from a Commission perspective also is calling upon open education practices. No, it's for us to try and make that link as to how we can face social challenges such as the ones I mentioned, climate change, for example, decarbonization, and many other things. How can we involve citizens in that by making open courses which are actually open to instruct the society, to get feedback, for example. Unfortunately, most platforms nowadays are becoming closed again. MOOC platforms are charging for that. And I think we need to keep an eye on those things if you want to keep open education truly relevant to tackling social issues according to the mission, the third mission of the universities. And to finalize, I want to say that we have open education embedded in some documents, policy documents, not only in European projects, but also in the innovation communication of the European Commission staff work documents is acknowledging the role of open science, which Joseph said in the beginning. It was very important during COVID times to make science available and circulate in society rapidly for us to find a way out of COVID, and open science certainly helped us a lot in those matters. No, so this is what I wanted to say. Is to say, okay, sometimes the discourse seems not to be there, the wording is not there, but if we manage to link open education to social challenges, we may be able to make it relevant so that policymakers can see that it still remains relevant and how we can use it. So just to finalize as an example, also in terms of awareness raising, not only about educating policymakers and helping them see, but also academics, we've run a national survey in Spain based on GCompedu and also on the Open Edu framework with more than 5,000 academics. And we've included one section in open education asking for the perceptions of open educators, of academics on their open education practices. And that was the point in which they scored the least. We had the lower score in open education practices. So many academics still do not know what we are talking about or what exactly we mean by open education. Because as Mark says, we suffer from many different ways of describing ourselves. So I'll stop here. I'll leave the links to the surveys in there in case anyone wants to go through the self-reflection tool. It's available online with the open education section on the new checking tool that we've developed. And I'll stop there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. we will move on, but now I will ask Carlos to set out the first pool, because we also want to engage participants and to hear their opinion on some issues. So we ask our participants, how would you rate the implementation of open education in your country? So the 0-1 is the lowest, the 5 is the highest. So please, of course, panelists cannot vote, but please, we would be very interesting to hear about what is your opinion, how it's going in your countries. So please cast your votes so that we can see how things are going on. So maybe this is the shortest survey on countries on open education. It's not very scientific, but maybe we could get some feedback on that. So is it working, Carlos? Can people vote?
Yes, it's going great. We have so far 110 responses.
Oh, perfect, because I don't see anything. So, okay, let's give it a second or two. Okay, so you will share the results so that we can see it. Okay, so we have some results. Very good. We have 119 answers. And I see that 3, which would say neither good nor bad, you know, is the most voted result. But maybe, Mark, can you comment what would be your conclusion regarding results we received?
Throwing me in the deep end there. Really, probably not actually, because it's a bit mixed, isn't it? Middle ground, I suppose. Yeah. I was actually just multitasking because in trying to vote as a panel member and finding I'm blocked out, it's a bit closed here. But I was about to say I'm feeling rather scarred about open education, because actually I spent most of last year managing the closure of my own institution's open education unit after its existence for almost 40 years.
Oh my gosh. Okay, maybe Pina, what would be your comment on the results?
They are quite disappointing to consider that open education, we've been at it for such a long time, but not surprising either, because the basic understanding, it's not there. And it's upon us to ensure that we need to keep it in the discourse, as Andrea has said. It's disappointing. I mean, 3, it's a safe spot. It says nothing. Yeah. It's a safe spot. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so we can close this and move on.
I found that if I could come in on this.
Yes.
I mean, I found that I sympathize actually with the majority in this vote. It's the question of whether you are a half full or half empty person.
Yes.
I mean, nobody could say, oh, that's brilliant. You know, you can see that there is some achievement. And I think none of us can really imagine a closed education, but on the other hand, there is not, you cannot be really confident to say in what direction it would develop. So this is really, I think, a political course. And Andrea also mentioned what the Commission has been doing, and I think that's very important, and that helps to change a culture. And I think that's what we all have to engage for.
Yeah, thank you. James?
Yeah, I would also like to come in on this. You know, we can, those who have been involved in the open education movement for a long time can see lots of progress and point to lots of progress. But as Andrea said and Pina said, we are also engaged in fighting against very significant backlash, very significant pushback. If we think that open education is about free and democratic values and access to information and access to education, and bringing more people into a democratic society in which we can share ideas. We are engaged in a tremendous battle around the world against fascism and authoritarianism. And that's where a lot of the pushback is coming from. And we have to say that plainly, that open education stands firmly on the side of sharing and access to information and more people participating. And many people around the world don't want that.
Yeah, actually, that would be one of my points, that are we having the issue that we feel that open education is endangered by present situation, in a way that maybe people are against it, and that it's not so popular anymore. Why do we still need to talk about the benefits of open education? I saw in the chat a post that a person said, my students do not know about open education resources. Actually, we are becoming much more society of consumerism than creativity in that way. So, well, maybe Joseph, can you a little bit point out how do you think, what is with open education? Why we still have to talk about the benefits of open education?
I think James mentioned now, not? I think it's something that we have to preserve, no? This the added values under this open education, which is democracy, which is openness, which is social change, etc. No? And of course, and I read some messages on the chat, no? That some countries and some areas and also some universities have, of course, particular business models and try to have profit about education, not? And this is the big fate. These two models, not? The one is it's an open and a free value of education, and the other is something that you have to pay to access to the good information, etc. No? And I think we have to preserve and to make clear with these values that it's behind of the open educations and promote it, because it's the only way that I said at the beginning, not to have the opportunity. And I like the word that mentioned also Mark. It's a way to also to benchmark ourselves, not, and also to improve our educational models.
Yeah, yes, I agree with you. I was just looking at to these comments and questions we have in the chat, and basically people say being physically present doesn't need to have open educational resources because everything is happening in the classroom. We are there. We do not need to share anything. A teacher will put on the stick or in email the presentation, and that is it. We have done what is needed. But maybe James, about open textbooks, you have been very engaged in this. Do we need open textbooks? How is going on with this?
Boy, well, what a question. Certainly, those of you who follow U.S. higher education know that in the U.S. we're obsessed about the cost of textbooks, but that is just a reflection of the great systemic inequities that we find in American higher education. So certainly there continues to be a lot of work focused in the OER space in making more textbooks that are open and free. But as I said before, there's more of a movement towards inclusive instructional materials, co-creating materials with our students so that we're increasing the sense of belonging of our students. And if anything, the pandemic, I think, has shown that our academics are perfectly capable of compiling instructional materials and collections of instructional materials on their own, utilizing existing OER and not so much relying on publisher materials. So we do see some movement away from that. But again, the big focus in the United States, or the emerging focus in the United States with textbooks, is moving away from the single volume and the single authoritative piece towards more collections and curation, and hopefully doing that with our students.
Yeah, great. Maybe just then to move on, Marina, I saw the question in the chat say, are we having the higher education as more elitist? So what would you comment on that?
Personally, I think we have failed as an elitist education system. And that's why probably it's difficult to move into an open distance of open education space, because we are challenging the core assumption of what education should be. And when education is challenged as an elitist system, then you will always get a pushback. But having said that, there are small steps towards getting into an open education space. And one of the big steps that we took was during COVID, where all of a sudden education had to be removed from a classroom. And people had to come up with creative ways. And as James is saying, we had instructional design. People started being instructional design. People had started thinking about, how do I engage a student in this kind of an environment? Something that they never thought of, given the opportunity of being in a classroom. But once that was removed from them, all of a sudden, we started thinking about different ways of doing things. So we developed, during this time, at a high speed, people became instructional designers. People began to assess differently in order for us to get to the level at which we want to do. And that is moving away from an elitist system that says it's only a few elite and voices of authority belong to just individuals, not all of us.
Yeah, thank you. Mark, your institution has been doing quite a lot on openness, but you said you are closing it. So I'm a little bit confused now. But maybe to comment how to make it more open in the way that we do understand that it's a benefit, because when you say it's a free or access to all, the resistance on political economic forces and interests, and definitely when you ask to teachers if they want to share their own materials for free, they're not so eager to do that. So what do you see? How can we do something there? And from your experience at Dublin City University, and you've been doing a lot of in that way.
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I could come at it at many different ways. Perhaps to qualify the comment I made previously, the strategy was in the post-COVID environment where open education and certainly online education, which we haven't completely grappled with, what's the difference? But when everyone suddenly thought they knew what online education was, why would we need to have a dedicated unit? Well, let's mainstream this. And if you remember in my opening comment, I talked about the cultural influence here, the political economy as well, if you want to link out to the textbook industry. So these don't always mesh. The theory may be good to mainstream, but actually the culture or subcultures that compete may not necessarily be aligned. I think if there's just stepping back from our own role, because we do want to make a difference, and there are plenty of examples where I have colleagues who are absolutely committed to openness. But I think, we're operating in a political and economic world where competition is generally valued over collaboration in market-driven environments. So, there are really big macro forces at play here. And there's a huge difference. Now, I say this being a little internationalized. I think I can say this and get away with it more than others. From Europe, continental Europe, and I'll include Ireland in this, where education still has a very strong public good dimension. I certainly wouldn't put the UK, but I would not perhaps throw Scotland in with England. So let's distinguish slightly there in case I offend any of my colleagues. If we look then to the US, where I'm from, New Zealand and Australia, in the case of those two countries, pre-COVID crisis, education was the third largest export income earner for the country. So openness isn't necessarily a good thing if you're making money from it. So there are these macro forces we have to grapple with. Of course, everything comes with a cost. Someone made this comment in the chat box about seeing openness and assigning it with being free. The costs are often the opportunity costs, which we really think about. In doing this, what won't we do? So again, for me, it kind of operates at many levels. I think we've kind of touched on this. It's a really big challenge, but I know it's a bit Pollyanna to put in the comment there about you have to be the change that you want to see in the world. But if you're not looking at yourself in the mirror and you're not walking the talk here, and I do have colleagues that I think do fall into that category, won't name and shame them, then I won't have any friends left. That, you know, it does start with us. We can affect some change.
Yeah, I agree with you. Did someone want to continue? Okay. Yeah, that is the issue actually of the culture. Why is our culture so difficult to change and to implement openness? Because it's not only open education, we tackle the open science as well, which is connected, the openness of environment and thinking as such. So before we continue, we have another question for the audience. So Carlos, can you set the question number 2, and then we will talk a little bit more about issues in pandemic. So Carlos, can you set the, thank you. So the second question for participants is, how often do you use open education resources in your work? So it's frequently, rarely, and I don't know how to recognize OER. So let's see what the audience say about that. So while we are waiting for the results of the survey, maybe Andrea, I can ask you shortly. I saw in the chat some questions related to the quality of OER. How to ensure the quality of OER, especially if it's not in English or any language which is really greatly used. For example, if it's in small country national language, how can we ensure this quality?
This is a great question because I see two sides of this coin, right? One of them is in terms of quality, when a university or a school is releasing content that is linked to their core, let's say, course materials or their image, they want to release it in the best quality possible. Therefore, the institution itself should be the one in charge in guaranteeing the quality, because it's no different from the education that we have within four walls. How can you guarantee the quality of education that a lecturer is giving to, is in his talk to everyone within four walls? It's just the same thing. It's just now we are going public. We are showing what we are doing in the classroom to the world. And to me, that's the difference. So some institutions are really worried about how they appear to the world because they want to appear well, of course. They want to increase the registration. So it's their job, their task to make sure there is quality in whatever they release to the world, in their portals, etc. Nothing different from normal day-to-day practices within an institution, in my opinion. The quality assurance controls should be the same, in my opinion. However, I think that we forget the aspect of reusing and remixing OER. And we should not be afraid of making mistakes. In fact, I think that open education resources are a great tool for provoking new pedagogical practices, as provoking critical thinking, engaging with content that is different from our own, and remixing, reusing, analyzing, thus providing opportunities for social values, critical thinking, etc. So For example, if a lecturer or a teacher is concerned about releasing their content because nobody in their institution has put in place a mechanism for ensuring quality, therefore they think, oh, I may be making a mistake, I'm exposing myself, they may refrain themselves from showing up their work because they are afraid of criticisms, right? And this is perfectly understandable. Whereas from the beginning of this open education movement, we've always tried and say there is a space for everything. There is a space for quality controlled content coming from institutions, the schools, the universities, but there is also a space from more, let's say, tentative, creative content coming from lecturers, from teachers, from students themselves that are out there to be reworked and reused and even improved upon. So I think to me, it's a matter of culture, how much we are open and able to put ourselves out there to be able to cope with criticisms, but hopefully what we say, constructive criticisms to improve what we do in our pedagogical practices.
Thank you, Andrea. Now let's see results of the poll, what they say. Okay, so frequently, quite a big percentage, 60%, still 8% of those who do not recognize the OER. And I saw your comment, Mark, that it's just jumping that a lot of OER does not meet accessibility requirements, as we have become more aware of this. So maybe just to comment on this, on your comment. So why is it important, accessibility requirements?
Well, first, I guess many colleagues here, the 60% who said they frequently use OER may wish to comment on that, but accessibility is one of these things that what it now means has changed over the last decade. Our awareness and understanding. I'm someone who's colorblind, and you would just be amazed at particularly Microsoft products that don't recognize the kinds of colors they use and things. So, and that's a very minor disability, if you like, or need that I have. But there has been some nice work done around quality of OERs and quality assurance criteria. I'm actually involved, in fact, as recently as the last 2 days, I've been very busy over the weekend working on, I have a contract with our National Quality Assurance Agency for new quality assurance guidelines in digital education. What I've done in those guidelines is woven OERs throughout them. So I've infused OER quality considerations. I would prefer to kind of use that word considerations, because there isn't a black and white answer when it comes to accessibility as well. But rather than have something that sits outside over and above what we have, to mainstream this within the system. It's a kind of philosophy I bring anyway. Sorry, Sandra, I probably went away from the question there.
Okay, fine, but well, when we talk about issue of quality, often there's examples when countries decide to produce high quality OER, and it's on the level of the country. They use the experts which are paid for development, or institutions are doing that. So it's from the top down level. Mupina, what would you say about that? Should OER be left to the individuals to produce them on their own, or should there be some strategic way of producing OER and taking care about the quality?
I think, let me start with the issue of quality. Where each time when you talk about open education resources, everybody jumps up and down about quality. And yet people have been teaching in classrooms using yellow notes for centuries on end, that have not been quality assured, that have not been open to everybody. And my belief is that if something is open, you'll ensure that it's quality that goes out of that environment. And I think the other issue is that because, and it's what Mark has raised, that we operate in an economic and political environment that promotes competition over collaboration. So as we teach or as we work in this environment, we tend to think that if I open up my things, then somebody else is going to use them. So we have that competition. And also in higher education, there's this big thing about ranking as well. So we are all in this competitive stage that we are not even going to reach what we need to do. And we forget that education, it's connected to multiple ecosystems: cultural, economic, social, political, environment, things that we are neglecting in the process of the education system, and focusing on an individualistic way of pushing the agenda. Education system must address the whole issue of the public good and the common good. And for me, that's a very important component of education that addresses all these ecosystems, multiple ecosystems that operate within this space, because we don't deal with individuals here. We are dealing with a variety of people from different backgrounds. Thank you.
If I could come in here, I mean, I see that a bit, I understand this, but I see it also a bit differently, but that may have to do with the public good background that Mark already referred to. So I think there are some problems of sharing resources, and they have been named there. It's my own, you're worried about the intellectual property rights, quality issues might be others. But I think a main issue is also there are probably many ready to share, but not so many are actually looking to take things up and to reuse them. I saw that in calls for projects, for example, where the academics that had submitted all said, well, I make this open source and everybody can use it. But I hadn't seen one application which actually said we are not going to develop this ourselves, but use something that is already existing. And I think that's probably a bit of a cultural change that we need here, to come more in a culture of, well, giving and sharing and using and reusing. And I think that's also where we probably, where the whole model is changing, also due to digitalization, because these things can now be easily, from a technical point, easily be reproduced and reused. But we are not really doing this, or not in a systematic way. So that's what we think is, when you say this about resources, that is obviously also true for teaching generally. Should we not move more towards teamwork, which you have in research? You have this already. It's not the one person who sits behind a desk which does the research. Research is teamwork, and teaching largely becomes more and more teamwork, also due to the technical implications.
Yes, you're right. Just a second, Joseph. Carlos, can you just set the third question, which is related to the put the own OER own materials in OER? But so, Carlos, please, Joseph, please, can you continue?
Yes, I just would like to continue going back to your question about quality, because I was thinking what means quality here in open education, or in open resources. I think if you decide to upload something and to make something open, I think it's a clear possibility to improve the quality of these contents that you are putting in an open way. I think it's something similar in research. For instance, when you decide to publish something in an open journal, that means that more people will be ready and able to see and to read your research in these open journals. That means I think the quality is improved when you are using open systems, to publish or to disseminate your activities, teaching activities, teaching learning materials or research.
Yes, you are right. It's very important that we publish in open research journals. But for instance, recently I had the issue that my colleague had to get some A1 paper for the advancement, and he chose the journal which is closed to get that. And that was the easiest and for way for him to do it, So it's not a good example, but things like that are happening on a daily basis. While we are waiting for the results of this last question about how often do you make your own work as OER, let's move to the issue of pandemic. Definitely, pandemic had it's something which we would not like to happen anymore, but it's not only issue of pandemic, it can be earthquake or the war. It's something huge. How many people actually thought that emergency remote teaching, which they experienced during pandemic, was actually open and online education, and had some bad experience with that. Do you think that open education is actually got on a bad in a bad way, something not so good because of the pandemic, or the pandemic actually showed that open education is result is answer to issues? So who would like to start? Maybe James, you can start.
Sure. Thank you, Sandra. Well, I think most of us here work both in open education and online or distance education. It's an opportunity for us to re-engage sort of the basic training and the basic information sharing that we maybe were doing 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and introducing people to the basic concepts. So we cannot let the impression stand that emergency remote teaching is the same as quality distance education, right? So we need to re-engage, do more training, and integrate into that training. It's a great opportunity to integrate into the training and the basic definitions around online, to integrate open into that. And that's something I'm sure that all of our institutions do. When we introduce academics or even students into what quality online education is, we should also mainstream into that open education as an essential component of what it means to be operating in the online space and becoming a scholar and becoming an academic, marrying the two, the open and the online.
Yes, yes, I agree with you. Carlos, can we have the results so we can continue with this? So how often do you make your work as OER? Sometimes is 64%, then always 70%, 8% do not know how to do it, and 11% never do that. Well, that shows that we still have to work, that there's a lot of work to be done yet. But maybe to see this issue as well with the pandemic and open education, maybe Mark, recently you suggested that we organize with the Eden very good session regarding the artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, which is something which came out quite recently. Although it's not new, but has been issue and talk about more than Harry and Meghan coming to the Charles crowning. So can you comment a little bit on that?
Oh, I mean,
not
who
as an
hasn't
expert, but just your view on that. Yeah.
Yeah, who hasn't had their comment? It's a bit like COVID, to be honest. I'm a bit over it. I wrote a blog piece just recently. If I feel really egotistical, I might put the link in. But I wrote a blog piece that was based around speculative fiction. And I don't think any AI-generated text or product or artifact could have created what I wrote. Now, that's not to be putting myself on a pedestal here, but it's more about a commentary about what it means to be human and the power of imagination, in this case, speculative fiction of the future of education. I'm actually intentionally not going to ChatGPT. You know, I've done that. I tried, searched myself, see what it found out about me. Actually, in the unit that I lead, it identified someone else in my institution who was the leader. So, okay, I have that screenshot. Part also, I have maybe a slightly unusual, hope it's not really strange view about content. I actually really value emptiness. I don't see the need for a lot of content. And one of the risks of OER is how I learned to do what I do now is because I actually had to design a lot of content. And that process of design was incredibly helpful in pushing my mind and expanding horizons and thinking about things differently. Yes, okay, I built it on the shoulders who came before me, but a lot of that was done before we had, fingertip Google searches and the like, and actually just finding content that's already done and copying that I see as very limited value in terms of the educative process. So I, at this stage, don't see that I'm going to be somehow transforming my work with ChatGPT. It would be great. I'm overdue on a journal article at the moment, and I have to get it down to 4,000 words. If I could just dump it in there and take it from 8 to 4,000 words, magic. Would I do that ethically? No. And who would be the loser? It would be me, because I wouldn't engage with the process. So for me, I'm on a bit of a pedestal here. There's a long history of claims about transformations in education, and we're hearing a lot about this. I definitely don't deny the transformative aspect to AI, but think about when television was first introduced. Actually came in pre-World War II. It took quite a long time before it became mainstream, and then we could have a really good debate about whether television was good for our lives. I'll stop on that note.
Yeah, quite true. Maybe Andrea, you can continue commenting on this issue, pandemic, and then Michael, I'll give the floor to you.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, I was just thinking of, let's say, the less prepared places, institutions, or regions of the world for the pandemic. Well, nobody was prepared, but I'm just going to give the example that happened in Brazil during the pandemics, as everywhere else in the world. Schooling had to go online, right? So at that moment, what we saw was big commercial players providing their platforms, approaching schools and universities, providing their platform and their services for free. I won't cite names, but we all know who I'm talking about, right? And having no option, nothing else in place, no open source options already in place, most schools and universities have adopted those platforms thinking, wow, this is a fantastic service. And actually services are pretty good if you think, the services are very good and for free. We have no money to spend on building anything new now, so let's go for it. And they really have called students to use those platforms, have put their resources in there. And okay, the platforms are good. They really helped. And I don't want to take the merit of that type of service, because I also think we have to have an equilibrium when we are criticizing or passing judgment on things. But on the other hand, policymakers, families, teachers, and the students had very little knowledge of what that means in terms of data privacy, of what they were trading for, right? So they were putting everything in there without really signing proper agreements on privacy, without really understand what would happen afterwards, right? In terms of how those AI, and all those data, big data behind those platforms could actually come back to society in a way of pushing further services. So I think that's something that we need to pay attention. I think the pandemics really raised that topic, the lack of ready to use open source resources and the lack of preparedness of teaching staff and institutions has led to a new space, commercial space that was actually available to be occupied by somebody. But now what we need to do is to raise this digital citizenship, this awareness raising of people of what you trade for when you are actually going for that. And I think that's where we are landing at just now. We need as educators to pay attention to those things. And as I said, and I insist, we need to educate policymakers. We need to educate lecturers. They still do not know a lot about open education practices, right? So I think we still have a long way to go with open education in those lines.
Thank you. Michael, you wanted to add?
Yes, probably two points. One on Mark, just reminding that since World War II, the innovation speed has accelerated a bit. And I would just take for granted that all of us here will still have to work a bit with it. We actually just put out a statement on ChatGPT because we were worried that these kind of instruments would be banned from universities, whereas we think that students should learn how to work with that in a responsible way, and academia should learn as such how to work with it. To be honest, Mark, there are a few texts that I produce throughout the day that I can easily do with ChatGPT with a few tweaks. Yeah, so it's a bit like being against pocket calculators in the 1980s, you know, with the arguments that you have to learn how to calculate and then the other thing that my feeling is that if you look at the COVID pandemic, I mean, I agree with what James has said. You know, it was, of course, the emergency teaching, but it was also a great opportunity to actually show institutions what they had in place in terms of resources, technical and human resources, and what they were able to do. Not always fully successful, I agree, yeah, but still much better than everybody would have thought if one would have thought it could be. And I think what we see at the moment is the classical Gardner curve. Probably everybody goes back to campus, but you will not be able to do that fully. And some changes will stay. We see that also that the telecommunication, the teleworking arrangements that are in place, the way how resources are shared within institutions, and so there is change, and you don't go back on that. The question is where you go in the future, and I think there the risk is really that we are discussing on how to share probably textbooks, open source, and within institutions, where on the other side, and I agree with Andrea, there is the big edtech industry, which sets the rules by which we will have to play in the future if we don't get our act together and get active on this.
Thank you. We are coming to the end of our session. I will take 5 minutes more. I have hope that our participants will have a time for that. I will ask from my panelists one sentence actually on the future of open education. In one sentence, how do you see that? Fabulous, it's over, it's not going, it needs this or that. Yes, definitely the opportunities of open education that can bring to society are large. Definitely, it takes engagement of all stakeholders. It can be only on one, like teachers or like managements or policymakers. They all have to work together. We certainly need to learn more about that. So investing into training of all of stakeholders is very important. And I think we do not have to question the benefits because they are evident in every way possible. So I had this a little small talk in order to give my panelists time to think about this one sentence they want to share for the end. And now I will start again, like I started in the beginning with Joseph. So Joseph, what would be your one sentence on the future of open education for the end?
Yes, I'm most optimistic as usual. Not I think the future is it's good and positive, but in order to preserve education as a public good, I think we need clear institutional leadership to maintain open educational models in the institutions, and also the great support of the governments to promote legislation, like for instance here in Europe, not in favor of the open educational resources.
Thanks, Joseph. Mark?
I was hoping you weren't going to come to me because I still hadn't thought what it was going to be. I'm not really sure. I think if we come back to the 8th Eden contribution to Open Education Week in a year's time, there will be a few more, I guess, accomplishments. But I just don't think the bigger battle will have been won. But as I've said consistently, that's not the walk away, that's to keep chipping away and finding where we have opportunities. And inherently, the work we do has a political dimension.
Thank you. Mapina?
Thank you very much, Sandra. I think we have to start preparing for the future today, because things are changing at drastic measures day in, day out. ChatGPT has just thrown us into a different dimension altogether. And as an education system, we need to address that. Otherwise, other people like the commercial space will come into our space and will never know what higher education is supposed to do and what higher education is. So today, and we need to start now to prepare for the future that we don't know, but we need to prepare for it nonetheless. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. James?
Yes, within mainstream higher education, open education is making progress as a tool within the mainstream. However, the space of higher education and the value of free knowledge within society is under great threat, and we have to fight for the future of democratic values and the free flow of information. We are engaged in a battle for the future, and we have to recognize that we have to play a role in that.
Thank you. Mikkel?
Yeah, I think we have all somehow the similar tone, different words maybe. It's also about keeping it as a public good. It's an important agenda point on the public good, and we have to set the frameworks in which we work with edtech industries. And Mark copied in our universities without walls, and I think that says it's all. So we cannot allow that education becomes private or exclusive.
Thank you. And Andrea?
Thank you, Sandra. Well, from my side, I think I'll repeat what I said before. I think that for us to ensure the future of open education that we envisage, that is already happening, we need to keep open education in our discourses, both written and spoken. It's the way we talk about things. So when we talk about micro-credentials, learning pathways, OER, open science, in the end, we are talking about open education because it's such this big umbrella term that embraces a lot of things. Inclusion is our inclusion, lowering down barriers. So if it's very much about how we construct, how we build the field, right? So if we look into those new routes that we are moving towards, learning pathways, micro-credentials, individual learning accounts, all those things, we are really talking about open education. So let's not forget to put it in our documents and in our discourses, so we make sure it's always there and people are reminded of that we are doing it. That's it.
Thank you. I wish to thank you to my panelists. We have just tackled one issue related to open education. As Andrea said, there are so many things, and this is actually umbrella term under which it's going on. Let's not forget that the last 3 years had taught us that we need to build resilient education, actually, either because of the situation which happens on the global level, either because of the development in artificial intelligence and things like that. So definitely open education as such should be priority of all the governments and on the global level. And definitely open education should be part of all the strategies. So thank you, my panelists today, for being with me today. Thanks to all the participants. Look forward to see you again in some Eden webinars, and please look at the Eden web pages, but also on Open Education Global web pages for the session within this week of the Open Education Week. So thank you, everyone, and bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.